because of what has happened, many assumptions are no longer valid in the world about Israel. And this is happening in Israel proper. This is something that, of course, they had something they called the conception, that they assumed a certain behavior on the behalf of Hamas that turned out to be untrue and devastating. So people are rethinking things in the land of Israel and here as well. And many assumptions of coexistence, of peace, of security, of safety, of who our friends are, who we can rely on, the stability of the world, the resurgence of anti-Semitism. There are many, many, many things that people are taking a new look at. So it's an opportunity for us to take a fresh look as well. A lot of times when there's cognitive dissonance, when we see something that doesn't fit in with our assumptions, we then, after a short time of shock, we try to reinterpret the events and try to re-justify and recalibrate. And sometimes we fall into the same mistakes that we had before and the same patterns because we are so committed to the idea that we'll avoid any evidence that contradicts that. And that's what we don't want to fall into. So what I want to do in this course is look at the Torah's view. There is something objective called Torah. Torah has an opinion on many things. It has a vision about the land of Israel, about the Jewish people, about our role. Not everybody listening to this class or participating in this class will relate to Torah in the same way. There's a famous line from one of the non-traditional movements. One of the leaders said, the past should have a vote, not a veto. In other words, this is non-Orthodox. We'll say the past should have a vote, not a veto. In other words, it's not binding, but at least let's look at the tradition. So there are many Jews out there in the world that will look at Judaism and look at the tradition and see how to apply it to their life. But I want to look at Torah as Torah is, which means there are different opinions, as we're going to see. And we're going to talk about different elements of Torah. How do we deal with disagreement? How do we look at, though, the big picture values? Well, we're going to see the differences are going to be in the implementation of ideas, not in the core ideas. We're going to discover core values, whether it's the sanctity of life, whether it's the irrevocable bond that we have with the land of Israel, the Mashiach, the ultimate perfection of humanity. All these ideas, there may be disagreement on details, but the fundamentals are the same. So we will get into a little bit as we go further. We will get in a little bit more. Pinchas, take a handout right by the drinks. There's a handout there. We will explore where is there most consensus within Jewish thought, and what is the way for us to make our way and have our paths illuminated. So first, I do want to give the lay of the land first. So the way this class is going to work is we're going to try to give the Torah's perspective on different important ingredients, important elements that we're all facing today. Feel free to interject, but I do want to give the lay of the land, although this is not my field of expertise, but I do want to give just the lay of the land of the challenges facing Israel and the evolution of some of those challenges over the year. This will not be the core of the classes as we go forward, but it's important for us to know what the challenges that the Jewish people are facing in the land of Israel. And abroad we'll get to as well. We're not yet there where it's as critical as life and death as it is in the land of Israel, although there have been some indications of us moving towards that in certain countries, in certain places. In places like Iran, it is very dangerous to be a Jew right now. You're being held hostage by that government, and the rabbi and the community are forced to go out and make statements let me make sure this is, are we on record here? Yeah. Make statements in favor against Israel and against the government of Israel. So there are some countries that are more dangerous than others, without question. But I want to talk about the lay of the land for Israel. So right now, the challenges facing Israel, you have Hamas and various terrorist groups in the Gaza Strip. Densely populated, the largest fortress of terror ever created in the world, hundreds of miles of tunnels underground, designed to kill, to maim, to destroy. And as if you go onto the websites that translate directly from the Arabic, Memory and others, you can see they're very clear about what they want to do, and their desire is not to give a better life to the Palestinians, is to destroy Israel. And that's clear. Whether that will lead to a better life for the Palestinians later on, that they can debate. But their mission is to destroy Israel. It's in their charter. They say it, they do it, they keep on saying it. When they speak English, they sometimes speak different languages. But right now, clear, this is what they're saying, we're going to do it again, and we'll do it again a million times. They say this on TV, to Arabic TV, and sometimes even to BBC. It's not always easy to tell the two apart. But the point is, they'll even say it on other media. They'll say it clearly. So, and sometimes others will say, no, we were willing to work out a ceasefire, but ultimately, there is no resolution from their point of view. Just because certain groups, I'm just letting people in, sorry. Just because certain groups admit to wanting to destroy Israel doesn't make other groups less dangerous. We're going to discover that there's an element where things change. People think as they are, they will be. As they were, they'll continue to be. That's not the truth. Things have evolved and changed radically just in the 20 years of the war on terror. Tremendous changes in what terrorism has become and morphed into. Things are not the way they always were. So first, the rings around Israel. The rings around Israel, you have the West, you have the Gaza Strip, where Hamas is firmly entrenched, hiding behind 2 million men, women, children. We're leaving aside, I just want to give the lay of the land, so I'm not dealing with specific problems here. Then you have the West Bank, run by a very weak PA that had Palestinian Authority that were originally with terrorists, but with Oslo, first Madrid, then Oslo, and then other agreements, came to a working towards a two-state solution. They sponsor and pay the terrorists, that anyone who's killed, whether Hamas or Jihad or any terrorist that's killed, they give a stipend to the family, and you get financial security by being a terrorist. This is paid for by the West Bank, by the Palestinian Authority, who is our partner, so to speak, in peace. They're weak, and if there was another election, the reason there's no other election, if there was another election, Hamas would win, according to all the polls. The Palestinian street supports Hamas, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, according to all surveys. To what degree, you can debate. But without question, there is support there more for Hamas than there is for the Palestinian Authority, which is seen as even more corrupt. Although right now that may be changing in Gaza, and we'll find out afterwards. But there's no question there is that element there that does exist. Then you have another challenge. Doesn't mean they're all the same level of threat. I just want to bring home to you the different types of challenges that exist and that we'll have to deal with as we deal with the issues facing Israel. The next challenge is Hezbollah. Hezbollah, financed by Iran, has 150,000 rockets, very sophisticated rockets, and they are a serious military force that really hold the balance of power in Lebanon. They are a big fear. In addition, you have in Syria itself, a civil war has been going on for a long time, with millions displaced, 6 million refugees left Syria and other countries, 6 million internally displaced, hundreds of thousands killed, both civilians and militants and military, over 50,000 alone just tortured in Assad's prisons to death, just in the prisons alone. What we're talking about here, though, there are many jihadist groups, we're going to talk about them in a second, that exist in Syria. So that's another front. There's Lebanon, there's Syria, there's the West Bank, there's Gaza. Israel is surrounded by all sides. The only side without many enemies is the sea, which is why when they say the river to the sea, you know what they mean. So this is the lay of the land. As far as now, there's also another challenge, which is we're going to talk about. Doesn't mean necessarily everyone is an enemy here, but there are enemies. So one of the other challenges is an Israeli Arab population. There's a handout there when you come in. Is an Israeli Arab population, 1.5 approximately, I believe, million Israeli Arabs. Those Israeli Arabs are divided into different groups. You have the Druze, you have the Bedouins, and then you have what you would call Palestinian Arabs. So you have these different groups that are there, and then you also have in Jerusalem, that's another slightly different, in between West Bank and the rest of Israel, Jerusalem Arabs have their own situation. But these are different groups. Some of them serve in the army, the Bedouins, some of the Druze. In addition, they have their own internal challenges, whether it's crime. A lot of murders have taken place over the last few years in the Arab-Israeli community itself, among Israeli Arabs, primarily connected to organized crime, money lending, and things like that, where there's a lot of heavy artillery, heavy machine guns and guns among them, but they haven't turned them on Israel. In other words, this exists as crime, and it's an underserved population that Israel has to deal with in its own way, and there's certain elements there that have become worse over time. That's the lay of the land. The danger is it could all blow up at once. If the West Bank, if Hezbollah had come in at the same time as Hamas, we would have had, I don't want to say how many dead. The miracle that they're saying, if Hamas had realized how easy it was, they didn't expect it this easy, they're all saying, if they would have, the 40,000 that are underground right now, instead of the 2,000 that came over, if 40,000 came through, we would have devastation of, I don't want to say the words, miracle of miracles. Despite the weakness and the disaster and the failure, this miracle of miracles. Hezbollah has held off. If it had come in at the same time, and if Israel had gone in maybe too quickly, miracle of miracles. The West Bank, they're trying to stir up. If the West Bank would come through, we'd have a problem. If Israeli Arabs, like happened the last time, we would have a problem. They are working on all fronts to dampen things down, to be able to deal with this problem, which is not a simple situation because you're forced to go into civilian areas, heavily populated, where they are hiding behind these human shields, and they want more suffering and death of Palestinians. And again, you go on memory and you could watch the Arabic stuff. I don't read Jewish newspapers. I read Al Arabiya, Al Jazeera. I go to the Arab stations. This is not a good habit. Don't get into this. My point is, it bothers me more, which we'll get to as well, when we see those who are supposedly neutral and the arbitrators of all that is good in humanism, the liberal and mainstream media, whatever term you want to use, for the New York Times, BBC, CNN, those people bother me much more in my heart because I know where the enemies stand. It's okay. But we'll have to talk about this obsessive recalibration of the moral compass of the Western world. There's a recalibration that is changing every moment. As the atrocities get bigger, they first have to say there are two sides to every problem. No matter what, you cannot have just one side right and wrong. That hurts their very view of the universe. It has to be complicated. So first there's two sides. Then there's another level where some have victimhood is a superiority, a moral superiority. So then they adjust it more that somehow the victim who raping, murdering, pillaging, and engorged with a bloodlust somehow have to be the moral superiority. Only on college campuses that work that well. Only elite ones. But either way, maybe other places too. And then you have another one which goes even further, which says it has to be all your fault. All your fault. Now, one of the great challenges today, all of us, if we're on social media or anywhere else, I feel like I'm walking, I don't when I walk into one of those places, I feel that every Jew would feel like you're walking into a classroom as a little kid, and everyone's standing around you in a circle and saying, "You're bad, you're bad, you're bad, you're evil." It's incredible, the volume. A lot of it has to do with the algorithms of social media and things like that. But there's an incredible amount of venom, incredible amount of stuff being pushed out. And we have to ask ourselves, what is our role, so to speak truth? That's a question we have to ask. I want to go just about the laws. Again, this is the lay of the land. And if I miss something and you feel we should talk about something more in the future, that's good. I want to talk about the transformation from Arab nationalism to Islamic fundamentalism that has taken place over the last 100 years. There's no question there were always Islamic elements in the hatred for the Jew. But 48, 56, 67, 73 was pan-Arab nationalism, secular, whether it was the Alawites or it was this pan-Arab association, Egypt and Syria, whether it was communism for the PLO, PFLP, some of them were clearly communist Marxist groups. They were not religious. They were not religious. They were nationalists. They did do terrorist attacks. Egypt sponsored terrorist attacks. Egypt and Jordan and Syria, who are not terrorist groups, at that time wanted to wipe out the Jews, and they were clear about it. And you can watch videos saying we're going to kill them all, the men into the sea, the women for us. This was said by the national leadership of these countries. So this is not like it's a new thing. The desire to murder and kill all the Jews was said clearly by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, all those countries, all of them. And you can see this. It's not hidden. It's not a. However, what has happened with the terrorism, which has given this lethal mixture today, what has changed, there are two primary groups, and all these things we'll talk about some biblical prophecies about some of these issues. But the core, you have two main groups, if you will, in Islam, the Shiite and the Sunni. When Iran was taken over by the Shiite, the overthrow of the Shah, that was an Islamic revolution of the Shia variety. So Islam, as far as the Shiites are a group that is more into ancestor worship, is less of the Sunni would say less of the pure monotheism of Sunniism. They also have this vision of an imam that's reincarnated in different leaders and comes back as a messiah, the 10th imam. So they have these different, I don't want to mix these up, but in general, Shiite is Iran. That's the leadership. Then you have, and they began to export Islamic terrorism. Hezbollah is the main recipient of the main Shiite militia. However, there are many others, like in Yemen. These are all supported by Iran. Now, what happened was, at the same time period, approximately, Mecca was taken over by Sunni terrorists. And when they took over the mosque, hundreds were killed. They held hostages. In wake of that, they complained that the leadership of Saudi Arabia, which is powerful because of all the oil, and the world is dependent on this black blood, black gold, whatever it's called, of oil, and the power the Saudi Arabians had was primarily because of that. But they shifted to, and they were being criticized for being too self-indulgent, not Islamic enough, real critiques by these fundamentalists. So what happened was Saudi Arabia became an exporter of Wahhabism and Salafism, which is radical Sunni Islam, which again, what happens is they sponsor 1,500 mosques around the world. What happens is Pakistan, Sunni, Afghanistan, Sunni. What happens is they fund these things, but really there's some laws of unintended consequences, just to talk about again, to put the lay of the land. Just for example, what gives this steroids is Soviet Union invades Afghanistan, trying to control its region of the world. It's afraid of Iran and all these things going on there. It wants to keep its power, invades Afghanistan. America ends up funding with Saudi Arabia and others and training these mujahideen, these religious warriors. So we fund them, and these are Sunni warriors fighting against Russia. What happens, of course, is after that goes, these things evolve and they become Al-Qaeda, ISIS. We're all familiar with these other Sunni groups. So these groups grow and they morph from one into another, either by ISIS is wiped out, but the other groups have moved into Syria for the civil war, where hundreds of thousands are being killed. You have right now in the world hundreds of thousands of people that were funded by the Saudi Arabia and Qatar and these other states. In addition, before we get to addition, I just want to get this. And you also have these Islamic proxies who are being funded by Iran in order to do its work, its its diplomatic work via clean hands. They let other people do the dirty work. This allows them to be able to not be themselves at risk. They are risk averse, Iran. They're able to change policies based on these threats of violence. So what we have is Iran working on a nuclear bomb, supporting Hezbollah. The interesting thing is Hamas was fighting Hezbollah in Syria until at a certain point, Hamas was losing its money and its power because Saudi Arabia has stopped funding these Sunni terrorists. The war against terror has made Saudi Arabia, not just that, Saudi Arabia itself has tried to move away from its Wahhabism and make a more secular state. How successful it'll be, I don't know. Will it last? I don't know. Will this murderer who runs Saudi Arabia and who kills people, will he get killed and someone else take over, more radical? We don't know. Just because it is, it doesn't mean it always will be. This is very important when we talk about security. In other words, just because you have somebody you can have as an ally doesn't mean it's going to last. Because the Shah was a good ally with Israel. And there were different times when Iraq was fighting Iran. Israel was giving, with the Iran-Contra affair, if you remember that. Am I dating myself or what? Reagan is giving funds to Iran through Israel, buying arms for them, and the money's going to pay for the Contras. A big, the laws of unintended consequences. But who you make allies with is not necessarily these people are not necessarily going to last. But what has happened is, because of the choking off of funds from Saudi Arabia the last few years, Hamas ends up in bed with Hezbollah, who they were fighting before, and with Iran, funding them tremendously, training. So a Sunni group makes strange bedfellows, but the Sunni group who is fighting Hezbollah, killing Hezbollah, is right now working with Hezbollah. So, and how much they're working together, they for sure are sharing the big papa in the sky. Iran is funding them both. So the lay of the land, it's a mess, but the world has been a mess before. And we do know where the address is. We do know where the address is. So, you know, the world is recognized. The same way it got rid of ISIS, the question is, will it allow itself to recognize that Islamic fundamentalism, the Sunni variety, in general, the Sunni world is trying to cut itself off from? Jordan is petrified. Egypt is petrified. If Israel does not able to get rid of Hamas, they are next. The Islamic Brotherhood started in Egypt. Egypt is weak. Jordan is weak. Jordan is trying to stop militias coming from Iraq into Jordan. They're warning them now. But they're Jordanian people, which is over 70% Palestinian, which we'll talk about in a second, their street wants war with Israel because the pictures and images and the shame of the Jews conquering or killing, that itself. Millions have been killed in the Arab world by other Arabs. Shiites are killing Sunnis. Not a word. Hundreds of thousands are killed by the Yemenis against each other. Nobody says a word. Oh, the Jews are killing Arabs. We got a serious problem here. The world is in an uproar. You kill about Arab lives? 6 million were exiled from Syria. 12 years of fighting, killing babies, women, children, gassing them. The irony is all these pictures, many of these pictures coming out of dead children are coming from Syria, from the civil war. They're tracking these pictures. So what's happening is there is a recognition. Saudi Arabia and Qatar, we'll leave it in a second. These other countries have a problem. They have a street, and the street is anti-Semitic because they've been fed anti-Semitism from the breast milk. Egypt, despite its peace with Israel, they were promoting anti-Semitism, all levels, the journalists, the lawyers, everything, the TV, the stories, blood libels, despite the agreement. This is for whatever reason, without getting to the psyche of the Islamic world, there's no question this part of that does exist. The attempt to change it with the Arab Emirates and with Saudi Arabia and all these things is an ongoing process, but the masses in the street are very much radicalized, and it is much more, again, about Jews, the outsider, the dhimmi, the person who's supposed to be under my boot. It's a shame and an embarrassment that there are Jews or a Christian crusader kingdom, is what they would call Israel, in our midst. It's more about that than it is about the loss of lives. Again, for Western world, we're seeing the images. But if we would look at the images of what's happening in Syria and Yemen, we'd have the same outrage. When people have different levels of outrage for the exact same events, it tells you something's wrong here. That's really the definition. Okay, this is the lay of the land. Anyone want to share anything before we go further? This is not anything Jewish, just my reading of where we are. Any thoughts? Yes.
So Karen Armstrong wrote a book called A Short History of Islam, and what I didn't appreciate is, according to Islamic theology, any territory that was Islamic and is no longer is anathema. So that's why there was a terror attack on the train in Madrid, because Spain was
How many terrorist attacks have there been in Spain? You count them on your hand. How many in Israel? What I mean to say is they don't always act. That is in theory. I would just tell you the evolution that has happened in Islamic jihadism is radical. Suicide was always considered wrong. What happened is you have these groups of people within the Sunni and within the Shiite who've decided, first of all, if you're a kafir, if you don't agree with my understanding of Islam, even if you're a Muslim, now you become a heretic, I can kill you. You can kill civilians. This wasn't the case. There's an evolution and a justification of the most brutal type of behavior. Islam wasn't always doing this in this battle with Israel or with the West. It became ISIS, Al-Qaeda, a new justification. There are many that would still say this is problematic. When it comes to Israel, they have a hard time saying that, which is another whole problem, is that you can't say do as we say, not as we do. When it comes to this, what happens is the chickens come home to roost. The people who are dying the most from Islamic fundamentalists are Muslims. That's the most around the world. Hundreds of thousands and millions have been displaced, and terrible things. Why? Because they have weaponized the religion of Islam. This doesn't mean Islam did not have jihad. It did have. But what has happened now, where individuals do jihad, where groups do jihad, where it's not a state, and it's not, sometimes some of them have protective jihad. But here, conquering jihad has not been for a while. Okay, you also have one other player who's a challenging player, is those who have memories of the Ottoman Empire, and they want to bring the glory past. Turkey, very dangerous. He's an Islamist, but what the idea of Turkey first, and of Turkey being the ruler of the region, you have competition of power here. Turkey, which is Sunni, but Islamic Brotherhood. Saudi Arabia, which is trying to move away from that. And then you have the Shiites, Iran. Each one wants to run the whole place. What they're willing to put up with others is the sphere of influence of Saudi Arabia are all these other Arab states that have made peace with Israel, and they have the purse strings, so they're working with Egypt and things like that, who's also anti-Islamic Brotherhood. Turkey is in love with Islamic Brotherhood. He was part of the Islamic Brotherhood. So what you have here is you have these, now, not to make things even more messy, you do have, as always, the world stage people, Russia, China, North Korea, who may be looking to stir things up. It looks like possibly, without getting into details, but the point is there are these other entities out there that are also looking to benefit from destabilizing things and supporting things, which right from the beginning, Egypt, right when Israel was started, once Israel is no longer, Russia initially thought Israel, socialist Jews moving to the Middle East, might be an ally for them. And as Israel moved into the orbit of America, Russia shifted and also saw that the allies of the Arabs are much more powerful and more important for them economically, so they shifted against Israel. So there have been these different periods. Okay.
And someone has a question on chat.
Yes. We'll get to all those things. We'll get back to that. We'll save these questions. We first had to lay out the lay of the land. Sorry, Ristavora. Okay.
Rabbi, if somebody joins the Zoom late, is it?
I'm letting them in.
Right, and which would it be? The 1S or the SH?
It doesn't matter. It leads to the same place.
Either way.
It leads here. Okay. So I want to show a short video. Let me just get the screen first here. One second. I'm gonna skip that. We don't want that. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna move this over. Okay, so this is Netanyahu after he spoke to the UN, and he then afterwards he told over a story at the UN. Here he's telling over to the General Assembly of the Jewish community his story that he told then. So this is the reason I'm sharing this, and this is not about pushing any one politician. As we'll see, we're not pushing any one approach among politicians. We're pushing approaches, not politicians, not political parties. So, but let me get into this for a minute. So, this should work. Let me see if it works here. So he had come back and he's talking to the General Assembly. He's describing how when he first became the representative at the UN, his former soldier, who's a Chabadnik, brought him to 770 Eastern Parkway on Simchas Torah. So Simchas Torah, which is the same day as the massacre happened, it's a day later because in Israel, the holiday was over already, Simchat Torah, because they have only one day. So that's why Israelis would always come to the Rebbe because they could drive. They didn't feel bad. They were coming from their Manhattan, wherever it was. Israelis only keep one day of the holiday. So here it is. And if anyone, let's see. Oh, wait. Here we go.
In English, I said, Rebbe.
Okay, so he's describing how he's brought up to the Rebbe.
Try to get his attention, but I'm not successful, so I tap him.
He describes how there's thousands of people there, they pass him in, and everyone's waiting and singing and all that, and they tell him, no, now's the time for you as the UN ambassador to talk to the Rebbe. All right, so this is his story.
On the shoulder. And he looks like this to the side.
You guys hear?
And I said...
I'll make it louder.
In English, I said, Rebbe, I came to see you. And he said, just to see, not to talk? And then we started talking. He talked in Hebrew. He switched to Hebrew. Perfect Hebrew. With a certain Ashkenazi accent, but perfect Hebrew. And we spoke for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and the Hasidim are getting very restless. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and there's a buzz, a hum that begins to rise. 30 minutes, 35 minutes, I think my physical safety is now in jeopardy. And after 40 minutes, he stopped. He said what he wanted to say. And he turned to the audience and with his hands started to get the Hasidim to sing and dance. And then something happened I'll never forget till the end of my life. The Rebbe and his brother-in-law, I think they were both approaching 80 at the time, or maybe in their mid-70s, they took a Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll, and they went into the center of this hall, surrounded by all the Hasidim, and there was a light that shone from the ceiling and bathed them in a pool of light. And I see these two old bearded Jews dancing in a circle of light with the Torah. And I felt the strength of generations, the power of our traditions, our faith, our people. And now I'll tell you what the Rebbe told me. He said many things, but he said one big thing. He said, you will go into a house of lies. That's how he called a particular institution.
The UN.
He said, remember that in a hall of perfect darkness, totally dark, if you light one small candle, its light will be seen from afar. Or yakarot, its precious light will be seen by everyone. He said, your job, he didn't say job, shlichus, your mission is to light a candle for truth and for the Jewish people. And that's what I've tried to do ever since.
So this idea, the Rebbe was telling him, going into the den of wolves, going into, it's one sheep among 70 wolves, but maybe it's 150 there. So let me stop the share here. So the point is not to be intimidated, and to say the truth as it is important, which is one of the reasons why I thought this class was important. We don't have to debate everybody, but we should be able to say things with truth, with confidence, without shame, without being a Marano. Right now is the first time where Jews are putting the mezuzahs in their doors and are afraid of wearing the kippah. This is a question. If you can't be Jewish in France, if you can't be Jewish, then the Jew would have to leave. If I can't be Jewish, what am I doing here? Am I going to be a Marano to remember it for 500 years, like we remember the Spanish Jews that didn't have the gumption to get out and go? We're going to hide? You have to hide today because you're really afraid? Then leave. You got to be a place where you can be Jewish. On the other hand, there is the ability to be strong in who you are, and there's no question our societies, the Western societies, have an obligation and a responsibility to protect their people, and we should demand that. And we shouldn't go and think, oh, we're less than, we don't deserve to be saved, to have an unpopular opinion, so I have to go hide, in the attic, as they told the kids in Cooper Union. Go hide in the attic. What are they, Anne Frank here? What is this? We have to be able to be clear and say the governments have a responsibility, but we also have to be strong. We have to be strong. We're not in Israel, But here, to be a Jew, to be strong for what we believe in and what we are, it's important. It's a mission for us right now. Okay, but not saying anyone has to put their life in danger, but to feel at least for yourself, not just for others. So what I want to do is, I want to take a look. We have these handouts, but I want to, let's get this first. Slideshow from beginning, and then I go to Zoom. Did I do it right? I go to Zoom, and I do a share. Let me know on Zoom if you can see all this. Okay, everyone on Zoom can see it? Someone responded?
Yes.
We could see
Yes.
it. Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Jewish claim to the land. We have these handouts that you can have, and the questions you want to answer is the Jewish claim to the land. We're going to look at the Declaration of Independence of Israel. We're going to look at historical and other arguments, and then give the Torah perspective. So the first question, maybe if I stand up, it'll be easier because let's see if it's working. I did something wrong here. I'm screen sharing. Why is it not working? Oh, there we go. Okay. There we go. Okay. I don't want to be in the way here because for the other screens, I'm going to be in the way. Let me get my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. So, number one, what place does Israel hold? I can even look up here. That's the truth. That's much better. Okay. What place does Israel hold in Jewish life? Why do Jews need a homeland? And finally, what claim do Jews have to the land of Israel? We're not going to talk that much about the why, because one of the elements that we're going to discover as we look at the biblical text is I want to differentiate between pre-exile, till the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians about 550 years ago, and 2,500 years ago, I'm sorry, and then again by the Romans about 2,000 years ago, living in the land of Israel then, and our relationship now, and then the future when Mashiach will come. There still is, without question, a role for Israel in daily life, and there always was. But the ideal of Israel in all its glory we'll save for another class. Here we're going to focus on two things. How Israel is central to the Jewish consciousness, awareness, and connection now, and the ownership to the land of Israel. Now, ownership does not necessarily mean, this is not necessarily going to push one way or another about do you give up land for peace. That's another conversation. If you're in a war, sometimes, if you're in a house and you own the house and the house is burning, sometimes you have to retreat. Sometimes if someone's mugging you, sometimes you might have to give up some of your money, your wallet. Just because you own it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to fight for it, die for it, kill for it, wage war for it either. It's a different conversation. Land for peace, peace deals, all these things are different conversations from a Torah point of view. First, we're talking about the moral clarity of who does it belong to, not who gets to take it. It's a different question. If the 500-pound mugger and his brother are sitting on me, I'm going to say uncle. That doesn't mean it's not my wallet. It's my wallet. I'm just giving it up. Another conversation, though, about that. I just want to differentiate for a moment here. We're talking here about ownership of the land of Israel. One of the interesting things is most other countries, if you're a Frenchman, you're named after France. You're a German, you're named after American, after America. America, Germany, and France are not named after people, because first was the nation, and then the tribes that were there developed. First there was the land, and the tribes that were there developed and make a country, and what happens then is the people then become Frenchmen. The Jewish people are named after a guy called Israel, the third of the patriarchs. His name was Izzy, Yisrael. He had 12 sons, the children of Israel. The land of Israel is named after him. It's named after a Jew. I mean, you can't get more Jewish than that. As Jewy as you can get. It's named Judah. That's what Judea comes from the word Judah, one of the 12 tribes. That was the portion that was left in the Second Temple period. That's why we're called Jews. We're called Jews because of a guy called Judah, and the land of Israel was called Judea because of him. All right, but let's take a look. Every wedding, we break a glass and we remember the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem. Every Rosh Hashanah, every Yom Kippur, we say next year in Jerusalem, every Yom Kippur and every Passover. When we comfort a mourner, which we're doing a lot of, we say, may God comfort you among the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. This is how we talk. This is what we do. Passover, Yom Kippur, next year in Jerusalem. Okay, let's take a quick look at reading number 1. Would someone like to read? Karen, do you want to read? Karen,
Oh,
are you okay?
yeah, sure.
Okay.
Where it says Daniel 6:7?
Yeah, from Daniel. I'm just going to share the text. Let's see if I can. You can go, Karen, you can read.
When Daniel learned that it had been put in writing, he went to his house, in whose upper chamber he had had windows made facing Jerusalem. And 3 times a day he knelt down, prayed, and made confession to his God, as he had always done.
Okay, so Daniel, this is after the destruction of the temple, the first temple. Daniel is in the country of Babylon, and the king had made a decree based on the advice of his advisors that no one should worship anyone except his gods at this time. And Daniel did as he always did, praying 3 times a day. So 3 times a day prayer, although it's a rabbinic construct later on, Daniel's already doing it. Although in those days, Jews were still kneeling like we do in the temple. If you notice, he's kneeling here. We still do that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur when we do the Modim, but in general we don't. But it's done in the temple, and Daniel was then doing that. But 3 times a day prayer facing Jerusalem. Jews all over the world face Jerusalem. That's what we do when we pray.
Everyone does it, or just the Kohen?
Everyone faces Jerusalem when we do the Amidah.
The kneeling part?
Everyone does. But not the Kohen, nothing to do with the Kohen. Everyone would kneel when they would hear God's name. They would bow, they would kneel, and then they would bow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Mel, will you read reading number 2?
Sound the great shofar for our liberty, and raise a banner to gather our exiles, and gather us together quickly from the 4 corners of the earth into our land. Blessed are you, God, gatherer of the dispersed of his people Israel.
We say this in the Amidah 3 times a day, but there are many other prayers. Half the prayers of the Amidah, the 18 benedictions, are about the future redemption and Jews returning to Israel. We actually mention in our prayers about 80 times a day the Mashiach and return to Israel. It's fundamental. We don't stop doing it. When we eat, Paul, you want to read? This is Psalm 127. We read this on the weekdays, reading number 3.
137.
It's reading number 3. It says,
Yeah, it was 137.
yes, exactly.
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. Number 2, there upon the willows we hung out.
You don't have to read the numbers, just read it as the verses.
For there our captors demanded of us songs, and those who scorned us rejoicing, saying, sing to us the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord on alien soil? If I forget you, Jerusalem, let my right hand forget. Let my tongue cleave to my palate if I will not remember you, if I will not bring to mind Jerusalem during my greatest joy.
We say this every day whenever we eat a meal before we begin grace after meals. On Shabbat, we pick a happier one. Would you read that, Yonasan?
On Shabbos before grace after meals, a song of ascents, and the Lord will return the exiles of Zion. We will have been like dreamers. Then our mouth will be filled with laughter, and our tongue with songs of joy. Then will they say among the nations, the Lord has done great things for thee.
Beautiful. The idea is that when Mashiach will come and the Jews return to Israel, the nations of the world will say how wonderful it is what God has done for the Jews.
The Lord has done great
That's
things.
good. I think we're good. That's good. That's perfect. Yeah, but that's basically the message that the Jewish people, we do this all the time. Israel is not outside of our consciousness, but it's not just a remembered place. Rather, it is an actual connection that the Jewish people have had with the land of Israel through all the years. I'm just going to put this on here so Jewish people have always gone to Israel. They've always been in Israel. There's never been a time when there were no Jews in Israel. From the time Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are in Israel, they go outside of Israel to Egypt with the 12, Jacob and his 12 sons, when Joseph becomes viceroy. They're there for 210 years, approximately, and they come back to the land of Israel with Joshua after Moses finishes his journey with them. From that time on, Jews never left the land. There were always Jews in the land. Sometimes it was forbidden to live in Jerusalem by the Romans after 135. But in general, there were always Jews in the land. People would come to and fro. Yes.
When God tells Abraham he's going to show him a place, a land and everything, and he's going to be the father of all that, so that's before the Jews are in the land?
Abraham's the first person.
Right.
He's coming from Mesopotamia. He's coming from the other side of the Euphrates River.
So
he's coming from Iraq.
Okay.
Abraham's from Iraq area.
So God says to Abraham, you're going to go
Yeah, we're going to get to those texts. We have them.
So before Abraham gets
there are Canaanites in the land, the Bible says.
So is that what these other nations are like?
Today?
Claiming
No,
that?
they're not even claiming Canaanites. No, the Canaanites are long gone
No, but I mean, is that why they say,
no.
it wasn't the Jews
No,
originally?
that's not it. They didn't even start that. We'll get to where they started from. Where they started from, just on one foot here, what happens is, just to go through the history of the Jewish experience, the king of Assyria, in about the year 300, 200 BC, no, more than that, 470 BC approximately, exiles the, more maybe, 570 BC, exiles the 10 tribes, and half of them leave Israel. And then you still have Judea, which is the rest of Israel, which is the kingdom of Judah. They are there until the Babylonians destroy the temple. When the Babylonians destroy the temple, the Jews then are taken to Babylon. Some still stay in the land of Israel. There's always some there. Most go down to Babylon for 70 years. The Persians take over. The Persian kings allow the Jews to go back. After the Esther story and Daniel, you have Ezra and Nehemiah. The Jews go back to the land of Israel, rebuild the second temple. They're there for another, the temple is up there for another 400 years. And in that period, the Greeks take over. And then the Hasmoneans have independence. So first they're under the Persians, then they're under the Greeks, then they have independence under the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, they'll come after Hanukkah, and then the Romans take over. And then when the Romans take over, they destroy the temple. There's a revolt in 135 by Bar Kokhba. When that's put down brutally, and hundreds of thousands and more of Jews are massacred, they decide to make the Jews try to disconnect them from the land. They make it illegal for Jews to live in Jerusalem, and that stays for a couple hundred years. And they plow over the Temple Mount, and they change the name of the country to Palestine from the word Philistines. The Philistines were a warlike nation that lived on the edges. In Arabic, there's no P. They can't even say Palestine. They say Palestine. It was never their name. It was a Roman name taken from the Philistim. They can't even say it. It's not part of the vocabulary. It never was. They don't claim that. If you look at early Arab documents, and you can see these things online, all attest to, and the Quran attests to, that the Jews were given the land of Israel. It's clear. If they care about the Quran, you look there, you'll see it. It's there, not just in hadiths and not just in other places. In primary text, the Jews were given the land of Israel, and it's not a question. And we'll get to the historical evidence and things like that. Okay, but Jews have always aliyah to Israel. Jews have always gone up to Israel. Maimonides, we have a reading. You want to read, Linda?
I wanted to ask a question first.
Yes.
It's Zion, you talking about God?
We're going to talk about that. God, yeah, we're going to talk about that, yes. Do you want to read or you'd rather pass?
Okay.
Okay. Would you read for us Maimonides for a moment, Toby? It's reading number 4.
10 great sages.
No, it's number 10 is just the number of the law. It is from Maimonides' Laws of Kings, chapter 5, law 10. Don't read the numbers. Go for it.
Great sages.
Great sages, don't read the number.
Great sages would kiss the borders of Israel, kiss its stones, and roll it in its dust. Similarly, Psalms 102:15 declares, "Behold your servants, hold her stones dear, and cherish her dust." The sages commented, "Whoever dwells in Eretz Israel will have his sins forgiven." As Isaiah 33:24 states, "The inhabitants shall not say, I am sick. The people who dwell there shall be forgiven their sins. Even one who walks for 4 cubits there will merit the world to come, and one who is buried there receives atonement as if the place in which he is buried is an altar of atonement." As Deuteronomy 32:43 states, his land will atone for his people. In contrast, the prophet Amos 7:17 used the expression, "You shall die in an impure land," as a prophecy of retribution.
Okay, keep on reading 4 more lines.
There is no comparison between the merit of a person who lives in Eretz Israel and ultimately is buried there, and one whose body is brought there after his death. Nevertheless, great sages would bring their dead there. Take an example from a patriarch, Jacob and Joseph the Righteous.
That asked to be buried not in Egypt in an impure land, but he buried in Israel. But Maimonides himself is buried in Tiberias. He died in Egypt. His body was taken there. So Jews have gone either to retire or to die or to be buried in Israel. Under different rule, it was very difficult to earn a living. So Jews that were there were dependent on other Jews. Our charity box flows from a tradition where Jews would collect money to send to Israel. Before there was a Jewish National Fund in a little blue box, there were kollels, which were groups of people that took responsibility for the compatriots that had moved to Israel to support them. So tzedakah Jews always gave, but the charity box was for people to collect and take to Israel, because otherwise you would just give to the collector who would come by your house to collect for the town. But this was people would give daily, and that became a strong custom among Jews to have pushkas. But it started with supporting Jews in Israel. Jews supported always, even if they didn't go themselves, even if they weren't always able to make it. We will discuss later, is there a mitzvah to go to Israel? How about today? We'll get to that. But right now we're talking about the fact of constant migration back and forth and different units. Okay, Aliyah to Israel, here's 1949. What happens is there's a population exchange. In 1948, in 1948, because of the war, and there's a debate among the new historians, the critics of Israel and others, how much did Israel push some of these people to leave? But about 700,000 Arabs living in the land of Israel fled in 1948. Some were told by Arab governments, don't worry, we'll finish off the Jews in a week. You don't have to be here, go away, you'll come back, you'll take everything over when you come back. Others were encouraged to leave, and we can debate, that's another whole conversation about how much fighting and other such things. But 850,000 Jews left the Arab Muslim lands and came to Israel. So here you have the Yemenite Jews, which thank God they're not there right now. I can tell you that much with the Houthis over there. Okay, however they're pronounced. Here we have the Gruzian Jews. Maimonides himself is buried in Tiberia. He lived in Egypt, buried in Israel. Rabbi Yehuda Levi, who we're going to read right now, lived in Spain, immigrated, and was buried in Israel. Okay, and here's his poem, which we'll read in a second. My heart is in the East. Okay, let's read some readings here. Okay, I'll do one more, I think, here. Let's see what we have here. Okay, we're going to look at 3 things: historical, international law, Jewish survival, and then we'll look at the Torah approach. So, let's take a look. Here we go. Stop share. Okay, anyone want to interject with anything here? Okay. I'm going to share this textbook, the textbook again. Here we go. Let me share that. Let's try again. Here we go. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Pinchas, would you read for us number 5, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi?
My heart is in the east, and I in the uttermost west. How can I find savor in food? How shall it be sweet to me? How shall I render my vows and my bonds, while yet Zion lieth beneath the fetter of Edom, and I in Arab chains? A light thing would it seem to me to leave all the good things of Spain, seeing how precious in mine eyes to behold the dust of the desolate sanctuary.
This is Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. He's living in the golden age in Spain. His compatriots were the most sophisticated, wealthiest, and had the greatest connections. This is the Joe Lieberman of Spain. And he chooses to go to Israel. He makes his way there. According to tradition, he's killed not soon after he gets there. But he's a famous philosopher and poet and writer of prayers. And this expression of desire to go to the Holy Land has always been there. Again, it wasn't always possible. It was difficult to earn a living there. It was difficult to survive. You were under the Arabs or the Crusaders or whatever it was. In different time periods, it was very, very difficult. But Jews were always there. So let's talk, though, about the right to the land. We're going to read a few texts here. We'll start with the historical. Okay, let me see if I can try that. Okay. So, here we go. From current slide. Okay. So our claim to the land. We have a historical claim, which we're going to analyze. We have an international law one that we're going to analyze. And then we will have the Jewish survival argument about the necessity for the land of Israel. These are what Jews are used to using. The argument I am going to make today, and the Rebbe made numerous times, is that these are all true, and they're all valid, and they're just as valid and more valid than other nations in the world that they have. Nevertheless, there's something deeper and stronger, which is going to be the uniquely Jewish document of sale and title rights, that is the Bible. The Torah, the Tanakh, is the title and the document that gives us this ownership for thousands of years. But let's first look at the arguments that we use and that people push back on. And again, there's an incentive for them to do so. There's an incentive, and they twist the facts, and they lie, and they cheat, and they're hypocritical, because many of these arguments that they have against Israel wouldn't last if they used it against America or any other country about being on stolen land, etc. But let's look first, so we have a fair understanding of these things. If we're not going to be hypocritical, then these are great. But to be able to speak absolute truth, we need something deeper. That is the argument of Torah. But let's start with the historical. Today in Israel, there are groups called New Historians that they started as part of a pushback to the approach that the early excavators of Israel would excavate with a Bible in one hand and a shovel in the other, and they would uncover these historical events and locations based on biblical descriptions. So you have these new historians, which is like revisionism, which is pushback against the traditional approach, and they would call into question different things. But primarily, they would call into question about how big was the kingdom of David. It was a smaller kingdom, not like the Bible says. They don't believe in the Bible literally, but nevertheless, you can't avoid, even these revisionists, whether they're Arab or Israeli, whoever they are. They can't avoid, anyone who's an archaeologist, historian, can't avoid that you have all, when you dig in Israel, you don't find from 2,000 years ago Arabic. The Arabs were not there. These were Jews. It's in Hebrew. You won't find Arabic there. When you're digging, you're not going to find Arabic till the year 600. We're another 1,500 years past that, 2,000 years past that. It's not even a competition, all I would say. So what you have here is the house of David. You know, someone may say, maybe it wasn't David, maybe it was Dawood. It's in Hebrew, it's not in Arabic. But there are many other sources and books. I would just say, I'm sorry. They find bulls, which are signature rings, with the names of people in the Bible, what their role was in Nebuchadnezzar's court, and they were in Israel. And we find their signet rings. We find these are in Hebrew. I'm sorry, those are Babylonian. But we find other stuff in Hebrew all the time. So here we have found at the foot of the Temple Mount. We even have stuff from the first temple. This is believed to be part of the second temple. The Arabs on the Temple Mount have been dumping truckloads of artifacts from underneath what's called Solomon's stables to erase any Jewish connection to the site. And the Jews in Israel have been doing nothing about it because they don't want to raise a stink. And it's always a question, you know, when do you want to raise a stink? But the reality is, there's records without them, without that, and many, 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 all over Israel. Wherever you go, there are people finding bar kochba coins. Wherever you go in Israel, people find things all the time. This girl, this boy, they just found things from 2,000 years ago. It's part of the very fabric of the country, the history. I'm sorry.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Just pointing out, just the way that's written, believed to be. I'm not questioning.
No, it's not so clear. No, it's not so clear. It's written because
notice it doesn't say this.
No, because they can't prove.
Say they don't believe it.
Right, that's okay. That one, that piece, that's fine.
Just the way
it's because that one you could debate. It has to do with how you date the age of certain artifacts. But bar kochba coins like this, the revolt against Rome, there are hundreds of these all over Israel. We know what it is. Hundreds of years before. Okay, so there's a coin depicting the facade of the temple. Okay, here's the question though. Just because it was ours, what would be the pushback? Well, just because it was yours doesn't mean it should be yours now. Not necessarily. What other pushbacks can you think of? There's lots of pushbacks that people give. You know, you were there, you're going to come back 2,000 years later. Oh, so we'll say, but we were there a whole time. Let me just stop the share for a minute because I want to be able to share something. Here's the thing. There was in early Zionism, we're going to talk about next week, we'll talk more about Zionism and different forms of Zionism. But there was clearly a movement that said a people without a land for a land without a people. Mark Twain describes how desolate the land of Israel was at the time when he went to visit, and others did too. There's a book called From Time Immemorial showing how there was always a Jewish connection and how the Arab farmers started to come in at greater numbers as the Jewish people moved back in. These things are debatable. I'm just saying anything is debatable, so to speak, some with less, some with more. There's no question the Jewish connection has always been there. Does that make it your land for all time? Just because you were indigenous, does that make it always yours? All nations have been conquered by other nations.
Exactly.
So that's a pushback.
Even individual people.
Right. That becomes a question. Now, you do have this question, hey, maybe you're not the real Jews. The Black Hebrews, which are a group of African Americans, similar to the Nation of Islam, they decided that they're the real Jews, and we're all fakers, spawn of the devil. Poor Black Hebrews, some Arab terrorists in Chicago they saw a big Star of David, and they thought it must be Jewish. They ran their car into the Black Hebrews church, trying to hurt people. Thank God no one was hurt. But my point is, you have something called the 13th tribe. There are different theories that all Ashkenazic Jews are really some foreign, the Arabs claim this, some foreign Khazars who converted. Now, first of all, that doesn't solve the Sephardic Jews. The Sephardic Jews lived among the Muslims and before the Muslims, and when there were Arabs, before the Arabs were Muslims. The Quran is full of those Jews. That's who the Jews who are a spawn of monkey and of pigs. They lived among these Jews, so they can't claim they're not Jews. They call them Jews. But the Palestinians, in order to be able to say that European Jews are, have taken over, they'll say, oh, the white Jews from Europe are not real Jews. The reality is, being Jewish is not something people were looking for from all sorts of cultures to try to pretend to be Jewish. We always were Jewish. We know who we are. We follow our traditions all the way back. The DNA is the same. We're closer to Sephardic Jews than they are to the Arab nations that they lived amongst, et cetera, et cetera. It's nonsense. I would just say that's clear. But the pushback would be, just because you were once there, okay, just for the record though, Jews, when they came to Israel in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were buying land. No one was replacing anyone or displacing anyone. They were buying land from absentee landlords. Overwhelmingly, you can see the numbers of how many acres are bought from the Turkish government, how much absentee landlords, and how much from peasants. Bought. No one's forcing anyone out. All bought with money raised by those little blue boxes of Jews all over the world. It was bought. Okay. But nevertheless, there is a state at some point, and when the state happens, that what does happen, people do get displaced, and there ends up being a Jewish state. Okay, so let's go back to the next argument, the political one. The political one, I just want to, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to share a short video from, what's his name again? You get it? From everyone's gonna know who he is. Alan Dershowitz. Okay. He looks young. Oh, everyone knew him 50 years ago, you're saying. Okay. So, where did I just do that? Here we are. No, wrong one.
There's a documentary coming out very soon about Alan Dershowitz.
Okay, let me see if I can get this. Hold on. Here we go. Let's try one more time the sharing. Maybe this is going to be it. I think this might be it. Okay, hold on, everyone.
Existence in the last century. All the countries that have come into existence in the last century, no country's birth certificate is more legitimate than that of Israel. One reason is that many of the men who founded the country, Theodore Herzl, Zeb Jabotinsky, David Ben-Gurion, Menachem Begin, Yitzhak Shamir, were either lawyers or had legal training. They were obsessed with making it legal. Unlike almost every other country, lawyers, not generals, were the midwives of Israel's birth, or more accurately, rebirth, since it had existed as an independent country twice before in history. Step by legal step, Israel moved legally toward nationhood, from the Balfour Declaration in 1917 to the San Remo Agreement in 1920, to the League of Nations Resolution in 1922, to the Anglo-American Convention on Palestine in 1924, to the partition of land ordained by the United Nations in 1947 into a nation-state for the Jewish people and an Arab state. Yet immediately upon its lawful establishment in 1948 as the nation-state of the Jewish people, Israel was illegally attacked by all the surrounding Arab states, as well as by elements of the local Arab population. In defending its right to exist during that war, Israel lost 1% of its population, including many civilians and Holocaust survivors. It also lost some of the land assigned to it by the United Nations. It captured other land from the aggressors that was originally assigned to the Arab state. The end result of that war against Israel was an armistice line that prevailed until 1967, when Israel was once again attacked by Jordan during Israel's war with Egypt and Syria. Between 1948 and 1967, despite the armistice, Arab terrorists continued to infiltrate Israeli borders and to injure and kill Israeli citizens. That was part of an official policy by the surrounding governments and by leaders of local Palestinian groups. All of it was in violation, obvious violation of international law. Following the establishment of Israel, a transfer of populations occurred. Several 100,000 Arabs who fled from Israel during the War of Independence were not allowed to return. Some had chosen to leave, assured by their Arab leaders that the fledgling country would not last a week. Others were forced to leave. At that time, approximately the same number of Jews were forced to leave Arab countries, another violation of international law, where they had lived for thousands of years. The difference was that Arab countries kept the Arabs who left Israel in refugee camps, where many of them still live more than a half a century after leaving Israel. And Israel, on the other hand, fully integrated all the Jewish refugees from Arab countries into Israeli society, where many of their descendants now serve in the highest positions of Israeli life. Israel's establishment as the nation state of the Jewish people by entirely lawful means is quite remarkable for several reasons. First, there is no country in the world that is as surrounded by hostile enemies as is Israel. It's been that way since 1948. Yet Israel sought the way of the pen rather than of the sword. It has needed the sword to survive, but its preference has always been for the pen. That is, for peaceful negotiations. Its peace treaty with Egypt in 1978, its peaceful abandonment of Gaza in 2005, and its many attempts to reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians are examples. Yet despite its entirely lawful origins, Israel is the only country in the world today whose origins, and therefore its very legitimacy, have been questioned by the General Assembly of the United Nations, by numerous member nations, and by many organizations that claim the mantle of human rights and the rule of law. Ironically, current attacks on Israel's legitimacy have taken the form of lawfare, the use of international law as a weapon. Any fair tribunal that judged Israel by universal standards would reject such attacks out of hand. But alas, international courts like the UN itself have been packed by those bitterly antagonistic to the nation state of the Jewish people. For example, the misnamed International Court of Justice refuses to acknowledge that Israel, a country that deals with terror attacks and the threats of terror attacks on a regular basis, has any special security needs. As I've demonstrated, this phenomenon, questioning the very right of Israel to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people, cannot be explained on legal grounds or on any other rational basis for that matter. So then, how can this worldwide attack on Israel alone be explained? In only one way. It is pure bigotry. And there's a word for this bigotry: anti-Semitism. If you have a better explanation for why the one country in the world whose right to exist is denied is also the one country that is the nation state of the Jewish people, I ask you, what is it? I'm Alan Dershowitz, professor of law at Harvard University for Prager University.
Okay, let me go back for a second here. So you have the legal argument, but the pushback would be, and if the world decides that it doesn't deserve a country anymore, like Kofi Annan said, are you going to tell me the whole world is wrong and Israel's right? In other words, what you're going to have is a situation where let's say the UN decides Israel shouldn't have it anymore. In other words, we are trying, when there's consistency and there's no hypocrisy, so then it's pretty clear that it has legitimacy, Israel. You know, that it's as legitimate, if not more, than other nations. All other nations are built on land that once belonged to somebody else. It doesn't work that way. Out of all the nations in the world, 99.9% have been that. Maybe the Chinese and others, but in general, whether it's, you know, the Romans that take over the Goths, that take over, then the Saxons come in. You know, every nation is taking other nations. It's not even a question. But for the Jew, it's a question. Why the Jew has that. So I want to take a look. We're not going to read all the text. I'm just going to paraphrase, and then we'll go to a final video, because I want to make sure we have time for that. And maybe we'll spend some more time with it next time as well. Here we go. Let me just get this. Ownership of the land, one more time. And I'm going to share. Here we go. So the text, basically, we have Israel's Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence speaks about the history, how Jews always look forward to it. I'm paraphrasing, but you can see it's reading number 7. And how the different nation states, the world gave permission to Israel. And then he talks about the catastrophe that befell the Jewish people, the Holocaust, why we need a state. And then the idea, he says here, look at right at the end of number 7. This recognition by the United Nations of the right of the Jewish people to establish their state is irrevocable. Says who? Ben Gurion. They decide Jews shouldn't exist anymore. The same way they decide there shouldn't be a state of Israel. What are we giving the power? We're dependent on them to say that we have a right to exist? That becomes a problem. In other words, this whole making it yours because of legal reasons. So if they decide for whatever reason, any kangaroo court that they want, that's no longer legal, well, the World Court has said so. You guys are doing war crimes. If we listen to the head of the UN right now, or whatever lawfare they're going to bring out of the box. So I would just say, if you take a look, I'm going to paraphrase here, but reading number 8, from the beginning of creation, we have the first Jew, Abraham, shows up, and God tells him, go to the land that I will show you, and that go to the land of Canaan. And God said to your seed, I'll give this land. And then there's a covenant of the pieces, in 15:18, God says, from the river of Egypt until the great river of the Euphrates. We have never owned that land. We have not had the whole land. That means if the river of Egypt is the Nile, if it's the Nile and the Euphrates, that means part of Iraq as well is part of Israel, and most of Jordan too. We never had all that. But because in the Torah there are different boundaries for the land of Israel, which we'll discuss in future lessons as well. There's an elastic boundary. There's a minimal size and a maximalistic size. But either way, it's promised to Abraham and his kids forever. Number 3, he says here, God says, you'll have a son, and you should name him Isaac. And the covenant of the land will not go to Ishmael, only Isaac. It cuts out Ishmael explicitly in the text. Sarah will bear you a son, and you shall name Isaac. I'll establish my covenant with him. And regarding Ishmael, I've heard you. Behold, I have blessed him. And then later on, you have in verse 21:10, Sarah kicks out Isaac, and she says, he will not inherit with my son, with Isaac. And Abram's upset, and God says, she's right. Isaac will be called your seed. Ishmael is not inheriting the land of Israel, clearly in the biblical text. But he'll also become a great nation, just not owning the land of Israel, clearly. And then it goes further. Jacob, many times in the Torah, God says the land will be given to you and your children forever. Clearly, not Ishmael and not Esau. Clearly in the Bible, the whole Bible. But the book of Genesis is all about one thing, telling us the land of Israel is God's gift to the Jews. As a matter of fact, the first commentator that every Jewish child learns when he's 5 years old, when he starts learning the Bible, is called Rashi. We've studied Rashi for the last 1,000 years. It's printed in every chumash that's ever printed for the last 500 years, because the printing press wasn't around 1,000 years ago. But his book became very popular. And he collected different midrashim and interpretations of the text, and that has become part of the warp and woof of what it means, the Jew reading the Torah. This doesn't mean it's the only way to read the Torah, but it's a fundamental way that every child learns. And it's engraved in our hearts. Take a look at, okay, then we have before that the burning bush, and then the whole book of Deuteronomy is all about when you enter the land, what you should do. Most of the commandments of the Torah are connected to the land. Okay. The Hebrew word, the land of Israel, is not used until the prophets, because till then it's called the land of Canaan, or the land of your inheritance, or a desirous land. It's called the land of Israel in the prophets. So for example, Ezekiel says, I had a vision in the land of Israel. But in the biblical text, although we're referring to the land of Israel, and we have the geographic boundaries described, the river, the sea, not just the one in Abraham, but we have many in Numbers and other places describing very carefully the lands of Israel. And we can see what it is. It's not hiding what it is. Yes?
Like when Moses does not get in and they cross over into the land of milk and honey, isn't that?
Yeah, it's the same land. It's all described. Every mountaintop is described.
So what is it called then?
Land of Canaan, where the Canaanites were living, 7 nations. Yeah, that's called the land of Canaan. Okay, so what the commentator, Rashi, who is based on the Midrash, he says, why does the Bible begin with the whole Genesis and with the story of creation? Start with commandments. A Bible is about commandments. Tell me what to do. What are you telling me stories for? He says the reason why the Torah starts off with creation is to tell you, he's writing this 1,000 years ago when the Crusades are wreaking havoc in Germany and France, where he lived, on their way to the Holy Land, and they say, why go down straight and kill the infidel in Israel? We have local infidels here in Germany and France. Let's kill them. So these are the first crusade, the second crusade, the third. He avoided, his grandchildren were not so lucky. He avoided most of the crusade problems. But he's saying this then. What does he say? The nations of the world are going to say to you, you Jews are thieves. You stole the land from us. And you should tell them, and we tell this to every child for the last 1,000 years, even though the land of Israel as an independent state was not even a dream that would happen before the Messiah would come. We tell the child, tell the nations of the world, the land of Israel, God created the world. That's why we start with Genesis. And he tells us the whole story to tell us that he made the land of Israel and he chooses who to give it to. And what's amazing, of course, today, the Christian and Islamic states don't believe in the Bible. They do believe in it. And they even have this in our Bible, which the Christians share, and even in the Islamic text, they have this as well. But for sure, they can appreciate that we believe in a text. If we would say clearly, unapologetically, it's our land because God promised us, it's right in the Bible, it's for all time, whether we should have come back to the state of Israel and made a state is another question. Whether now we should conquer other lands is another question. Whether now we should retreat from our lands because we're afraid of things is a different question. But who does it belong to? If you believe in the Bible, you believe it's God's gift to the Jews for all eternity. If you don't believe in the Bible, I can't help you, but you can at least respect that I believe it. And if we said it emphatically, without saying like the Americans used to say about Israel, they have no red lines, they only have pink lines. Everything they say is a red line, then they adjust. Why? It wasn't coming from a sense of strength and of security, of belief and absoluteness. That if you did say it, there's nothing to talk about. You're not going to change my religion. If you tell me to believe in a Trinity, I'll say no. If you tell me to believe in Muhammad, I'll say no. If you tell me to believe the land of Israel is not mine, I'll say no. It's the whole Bible. I can't avoid the Bible. Say it. Don't be embarrassed. Look in the Bible. Not a problem. You sound like a religious fanatic? It's okay. These are religious fanatics. It's okay. The world is full of fanatics. It's okay. But it's not a crazy fanaticism. It's, hey, I wish I could change my religion for you, but it's in the Bible. It's the whole Bible. Every verse, every story, the whole Genesis through Exodus, Numbers through Deuteronomy, is all about entering the land of Israel. All the commandments, most of the commandments can only be fulfilled in Israel. Okay. This is I want to close. We have 6 more minutes. I just want to close with a video. I know I'm a bit over my schedule. So if someone has to go, I appreciate it. Let me just get this last one just to close with it and we'll come back to these things. Okay, this is 7 minutes. I'm going to share it. And this is a little compilation of the Rebbe talking about this idea of the irrevocable gift of the land of Israel to the Jews based on all these biblical texts. You can read the biblical text. You just open up the Torah. A matter of fact, when Ben-Gurion was facing the Peel Commission, they said to him, the British, says, you're debating with the Arabs about land, where's your land record? And he picked up the Tanakh, and he was an atheist. And he said, this is our land record. As a historical record, this is as good as you get. There's no other book with this pedigree. The Quran doesn't show up till much later. This is what we have, whether the Greek translations or the Hebrew or the Aramaic translations, it's the same Bible. It's all full of the Jews owning the land. Enough narishkeit. Don't hide. They have no problem with the kafiyas and everything in the UN standing up for their religious beliefs. Why should we be these poor cousins where we're trying to equivocate and say, legally, excuse me, Mr. Prime Minister, it's ours. It's ours. God gave it to us. Read your Bible. God's gift to the Jews for all eternity. I shouted, doesn't make it more true. But is that you can read the Israeli, you can read the Declaration of Independence, and the one thing that's not in the Declaration of Independence is this is God's gift to the Jews from God. It's not there. God is not even mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. They made a compromise. They put the Rock of Israel, the Hope of Israel, that they closed with, to make a compromise. It was a very secular group of people that were part of the point of the spear to make this happen. So there was an avoidance of that. And what's interesting is, it's true that what you were fighting with initially was nationalism. And with nationalism, so the legal and all that makes a difference. Now that you're talking that it's become, not because of us, but because of what has happened in the world the last 30, 40 years, where it's become a religious war. You can't avoid it. Even the lefty, even the terrorist groups that were more, communists or Marxists or whatever it was, revolutionary groups, have bought into and been co-opted by the Islamists. So what you do have here, for better or for worse, it does exist. And what they do understand the idea of absolute faith. They do understand it. If we say whether they're going to put down their arms because we say that, that's fine. But all the discussion and conversation and the debate about it, and the Jews retreating from each of their stances in order to allow for a little more room for the other, has not been helpful. This doesn't mean, this argument is not about the two-state solution, a three-state solution, a four-state solution, a one-state solution. That's a different question, which we're going to cover the next 2 weeks or so. We'll get to that. But we're talking about now the ownership, unequivocally Jewish. The Bible, the Torah, God. This is the Jewish perspective. Again, one could take a secular perspective, and it's been not working that well. You could bang your head against the wall. We have the historical. We have the fact that we survived the Holocaust and we needed a state. Hey, go do it in Uganda, or Kenya as it was called really in that time. Go do it in Russia. Why are you going to make it here? Oh, we have the legal right. Well, what happens if then why are you listening to all the other legal things they're telling you? They're telling you this is illegal, that's illegal, you can't fight back, tie both hands behind your back and try to fight them with a paper bag over your head. No weapons, because that's not going to be commensurate to their power. It has to be proportional. You also have to shoot indiscriminate rockets at their civil. No, they don't say that. But they say, well, in other words, you're going to listen to their legal, that becomes the arbitrator, the world? The world hasn't done well for us. The world hasn't done well for us, not in the past. They like dead Jews, not everyone, but in general, historically. When the Jew fights back, 67, once they were victorious, the Jews were no longer the David against Goliath. And they fell out of favor. And the reality is today, we're not in favor. And if you're going to let the world court, which is dominated by entities that have interests, not friendships. Governments do not have friendships. They have interests. And if the interests do not align based on their street, like much of the Arab world, or economics, or power, like Russia, North Korea, China, they're not going to be there for you. And don't expect them to be there. You're going to have to be there for yourself, and you have to be able to be strong about it. This is ultimately where we are. So the question the Rebbe would ask is, don't avoid saying the G word, God. Don't avoid saying the B word, the Bible. Don't avoid saying the T word, the Torah. Just say it. Doesn't mean you don't use the other arguments too, but there's a foundational approach here that's Jewish. That's Judaism. If someone's less committed to Judaism, it's fine. But this is Jewish, and it is a Jewish state, and it is for Jewish people. Of course, it also acts as a place to save all Jews. But why is it yours? God gave it to us. Wow, that was easy. That's a relief. To fight through the whole Dershowitz, I got to fight. That's just one. I got to fight through everybody who's going to call into question my legitimacy. I am somehow taking care of I'm usurping an indigenous people. I'm the indigenous people. More than that, God gave it to me. He made the whole world. The whole world is about Israel. Read the Bible. You don't like the Bible? What, you're not Christian, you're not Muslim? Okay, I can't help you. But this is what I believe. To be able to say that as a people, as a nation, would be a revolution. That is a Jewish view on how to, and again, I'm not saying throw out the other arguments. I'm not saying avoid them, but to recognize that these other arguments don't work fully. Because people who are determined to discriminate against you will be able to find holes and turn things around. But when you speak with straight faith in an absolute way, where I'm not debating, wait, who gave the UN right? Or as an Arab would say, because the Nazis killed you, I have to suffer. What is that? One has to be able, and again, there are points. Again, you take each one to the logical extreme. All these countries, they were never an independent state. All the Arab nations were under the Ottoman Empire or then under English or French rule. They were tribes without flags, as a wonderful book has it. In other words, this whole thing was artificial, nationality for them. It didn't exist. And now we're in a period, we're post-nationalist, and we're trying to make a caliphate. All these failed states around us, and the ones that are not yet failed are soon to be failed. Everyone's done with statehood. One world government, except for one thing, a Palestinian state. No, statehood is dead. No, we want a Palestinian state. You're trying to make, Hamas says clearly, it's not about Palestine, it's about an Arab caliphate. They say it clearly. They say it in Arabic and in English. It's a war for the entire world. We'll start with Israel.
The end times.
I don't know, they're not saying that necessarily, but I'm just saying that's another, we're gonna get to Mashiach. We're gonna get to Mashiach. We're gonna get to it. I just want to just be able to pull this one idea, to accentuate this one idea that what's happening is there's this movement, so to speak, of delegitimizing Israel, and the confidence to be able to say, land of Israel is God's gift to the Jews, always was, always will be for all eternity, is a Jewish approach. To be continued. Anyone that wants to schmooze with each other, you can do so. Toda rabah. Toda rabah. Vakasha.